Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Brodinski. Hey, on May 9, the Wallingford Planning and Zoning Commission adopted an affordable housing plan. The idea behind this plan was that it would encourage more affordable housing units in the town of Wallingford. They probably didn't want to take this up, but they were required to because the state of Connecticut passed a statute that says every municipality is supposed to have an affordable housing plan. So they took this up and they passed this document. They approved this document, and very impressively, it was put out by the South Central Regional Council of Governments, SCROG for short. And it's 69 pages of aspirational, general sort of guidelines, not terribly practical, not terribly specific, but it was something that Wallingford had to do. And the Citizen Mike Show thought, what would a real plan for affordable housing look like? What would a good practical plan look like, and where would it come from? Well, we found the answer. We interviewed a real pro. She is Renee Dobos from the Connecticut Housing Partners. Renee has spent a career in housing and affordable housing. She was the acting executive director of the Wallingford Housing Authority before that. She was the executive director of the New Haven Housing Authority, and she's worked all her life in the area of finance. She got a master's of business administration from the University of New Haven, and her bachelor's degree was in finance. So we went to Renee with Connecticut Housing Partners, not because we were treating her as a prospect to come into Wallingford, but because she's sort of an expert in this field. And she laid out over the course of our conversation with her, sort of a practical roadmap for a real affordable housing plan. Let's watch that interview. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. Hey, Renee Dobos, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We do appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to discuss affordable housing with you today.
Yeah, well, Wallingford is beginning to discuss affordable housing and what can they do, if anything, to encourage affordable housing, which got me to thinking, how come there aren't more affordable housing projects in Connecticut?
Well, I don't think it's from a lack of trying. I think a lot of people think that the government builds all affordable housing, and that's not really the case. We have to do a lot of fundraising, and we have to approach different funders to build a financing scenario that allows us to build affordable housing. The pandemic really highlighted for everybody the need for affordable housing. And there's a statistic rolling around in the state of Connecticut. We're currently short 88,000 units of affordable housing.
Yeah, you mentioned, and is it getting worse, by the way? Do you see the long-term trend is?
So we're very fortunate right now because our current governor has begun to recognize that affordable housing is really a key thing that is needed in the state of Connecticut, to keep people from moving out of the state, and also to have a workforce that is viable to the local economies. So there's been investment. He's been making some investments with financing and funding through the Department of Housing.
So I wanted to get into this financing question, and more specifically, what are the challenges and obstacles to a developer that may want to get into affordable housing? First, talk to us about the financing. What do they have to put together to make a successful affordable housing project?
So with affordable housing, you can imagine that the rent that's being charged is much less than, say, a market rate development or market rate apartment complex. So in order to make it successful, we need to keep the debt on that property as low as possible. So one way we do that is through the investment of tax credits that we receive from investors. And then once we have those tax credits, say, let's just spitball, say a project costs $10 million, say I receive $4 million of tax credits. That's cash coming into the project that I don't have to pay back. And the investor is rewarded because they're able for the next 15 years write off these tax credits. So that's how they get the return on their investment. So then we're able to partner that financing with either the Federal Home Loan Bank or the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, the Department of Housing, and even HUD. HUD, opens up notices for funding availability. And so, we try to stay on top of that and make sure that, we're ready if a funding opportunity comes forth.
Tax credits is a little bit out of most people's bandwidth. And if you could, in layman's language, sort of explain that. Who are the people that are looking for tax credits? How do they benefit? What's the return on their investment? Mm-hmm. And we don't know. I don't know anybody that wants tax credits. Where do we find them? How does this all work?
So mainly they're investment houses or financing houses, the big investment folks such as Redstone or NEF. There's multiple people out there that are willing to invest in affordable housing. So we'll literally put a request for proposal on the street to try to attract who wants to invest in our project. And then of course, there's all kinds of financing data that we have to furnish the prospective investor so that they can see the viability of the project and to make sure that the investment they put in is really going to be a good return on their investment.
And then you mentioned the CHFA and the government sources. Mm-hmm. You just walk us through or explain how big of a headache is it to get their support and their funding?
So as with any bureaucratic agency, there's a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through, but they're designed to make sure that the end product is safe and decent, affordable housing. So if we are sourcing a piece of land, there may be some environmental testing that has to take place to make sure that the land isn't polluted before we build on it. And then once we approach the state, say Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, they have an application process that is point driven. So those points are telling us what the state is interested in. You may get a lot of points if you're in an opportunity zone. You may get more points if more than 50% of the units are 2 bedrooms or higher. So those are the things that are driving what the state's interested in. And every year they evaluate that point system based on what their current goals are for each annual cycle.
So when they put in money, is this in the nature of a long-term low interest rate loan, or is it equity money, or what is it exactly?
Typically the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, it's a loan. It's typically 30 or 40 years, depending on the terms. They typically sell bonds to finance the loan. So that's how the state gets the money. And then the Department of Housing is the actual entity that's funneling through dollars that they may get from the feds, the federal government, or HUD may funnel some money through the different states. And so then if we have a gap, say we don't have enough money to be able to build the project and the state's really interested, then that would be a deferred grant, say for instance, that they would infuse into the project to make sure it's viable. And then if we resyndicate 20 years from now, then that note would get paid back at that time.
So it sounds like there is no other investor putting in their own bank account money, into the financial stack. It's the tax credits, it's the government, and that accounts for all the cash.
If you're building something that's 100% affordable, if I'm a market rate developer, I may go down a different path. I may get traditional financing and still attract an investor to provide tax credits, but only a percentage of those units would be classified as affordable. And so therefore their annual cash flow of the project would be very different than, say, for instance, us as a nonprofit as we develop affordable housing. So we're focused on 100% of the units being affordable. A market rate developer is likely a percentage that would be dictated by the varying municipalities that they would build into.
Let's take another angle on this. If a developer is looking around for a place, an opportunity to put in an affordable housing project, how would they narrow down the search? Where would they look? What would turn them on? What would turn them off?
Well, it depends on the land. Say if it's new development, the land would be key to evaluate. If there's a tremendous amount of ledge that may add to the cost of developing on that property, they would want to understand the water and sewer infrastructure, if it exists or not, and if not, what the cost would be to add it. They would be looking at any kind of contaminated soil, the brownstones. Everyone understands what brownstone is. So a lot of times trying to deal with contaminated soil could be really expensive. So there's a whole bunch of things that someone looks at as they're evaluating the project. And then also the density. How many units can we get onto this particular parcel of land, and what is the local planning and zoning board comfortable with? So you have to engage the planning and zoning boards early on to understand what it is that their interests and needs are, so that you can build something that the town thinks is desirable, because you want to partner with the town or the city. We as an organization are not interested in any kind of adversarial relationship with the municipalities. We want to partner with them. And another thing that has been really important for us is a lot of times when we partner with a different municipality, they may have land that's in their stock already. And so they'll give us a land lease. We'll build on the property that the municipality still owns the land. So 50 years from now, when the thing gets torn down, the town still has their land. And that's a really important opportunity as well. And then it keeps the cost down of the particular project as well.
I want to get some context of the size of the project that we're talking about. We're kind of talking hypothetically, but what would be the minimum size of the project and number of units, or any other way you want to describe it? And then I want to go from there with some examples. Yeah.
Well, every developer has their own concept of what that is. For us as a nonprofit, we typically do not want to build anything less than 30 units. Closer to 50 is better for us, because the more units, that means the better the cash flow is, the more viable the project will be. And, I'm not going to lie, the brain damage to build 10 units and build 50 units is exactly the same. So we want to really try to economize our staff and, build as much as we can. So
again, I want to kind of paint a verbal picture of what this might look like. Give us what might be a typical mix of a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, and maybe a mix of the square feet involved in each of those units, and maybe the stories, how high it is, so I can get a picture, and then we'll go from there. Yeah.
Well, again, it goes back to planning and zoning and what they'll allow. So for instance, in Stanford, we have assets. I have a 10-story high rise. I would never be allowed to put a 10-story high rise in Monroe, Connecticut. So we're sourcing a new deal over there now, and they're keeping the height to 3 stories. So we have to make sure, if we know we can only go so high, then the amount of land that we have, so we can spread out a little bit more to get the units that we want, has to be a little bit different. Whereas in Stanford, if we can go really high, then the footprint could be smaller than, say, in Monroe.
So let's say you're in a 3 to 4 story town. How many acres do you need?
So 2 is usually the best for us in a more urban environment. We could do something in a more rural environment. In an urban environment, we could get away with 1 acre if we're able to address the parking that's demanded by, say, going a little bit underground, or, having it under the building as opposed to surrounding the building. So there's lots of different ways that we can manage that.
And you mentioned planning and zoning, but we're very aware of a state statute that says if an affordable housing project wants to locate in a town, and if they want to play hardball, they can kind of ignore the local planning and zoning regs and build what they want, and the town can fight them in court, and of course they'll lose. Yet I hear you saying, we don't want to go down that path. We want to work within, existing planning and zoning in it, but everyone knows you don't have to do that. So why are you emphasizing sort of, we want to work within the rules?
Well, I think it's really important to have a partnership with the local municipalities and make them understand we're benefiting the community. We want to take away the stigma of what affordable housing is and remove the not in my backyard NIMBYism that's happening. So when we go into a new municipality that we haven't been in before, we'll bring them to some of our other assets so that they can see and imagine what could be in their community. I think a lot of people hear affordable housing and they think of public housing authorities, which, admittedly over the years have had some stigmatized attitudes towards it. But even the local housing authorities are redoing their assets and turning them into tax credit investment assets so that they can deconcentrate what they've had and then build these terrific new buildings. So yes, I understand what you're saying. And I don't want to come into a municipality and be an adversarial and say, I'm going to build this no matter what, because I have 830G behind me. If I get sued, I'm spending a tremendous amount of money in court, where I'd rather spend that money in pre-development and sourcing new deals and working with the municipalities.
Getting back to what a town could do that's within its power
Mhm.
to attract an affordable housing project. You mentioned water and sewer, and how important is that? If there is no water and sewer, is that a deal killer?
Not necessarily. Our project in Monroe, actually, we're putting in a septic system. There is no sewage attached to it, even though it's on Main Street in the town. So it's just a matter of evaluating what those costs are. And then what that did for that particular project is the size of the sewage structure dictated how many bathrooms I could have, which then dictated how many units I could have. So it capped it out. Of course, we would like to have built more, but that sewage infrastructure capped us out to 49 units. And so we're okay with that. And so we're working with that.
Um, you started to get into the aesthetic look
Mhm.
of the newer project. If you could give us just a little more detail as to maybe to calm some fears. Maybe people may say, well, an affordable housing project, you could recognize it right away. Maybe that's true. I don't know. That's why you're on the show. Maybe an affordable housing project looks like any other market rent project from the outside. I don't know. Could you help us, with that aesthetic issue that I'm trying to get at?
Yes. So again, that's in partnership with the local municipalities, because we'll keep talking about Monroe. Monroe, is very, is a little bit on the rural side, a lot of colonials. They don't want this ultra modern building that's full of glass sitting in their particular neighborhood. And we understand that. So we come in trying to have the property look very similar to the aesthetics of the municipality that we're working in. And I would challenge that you could come to our assets and not know that it's affordable housing. We maintain our property very well. We try to do the best designing possible at the time. And I'll give another example. When we went into Wilton, Wilton had 5 acres of land that they said, all right, you can build some affordable housing over here. It was by the train track. It was off the main drag. They were thinking nobody's going to see it. So we built this beautiful 51 unit senior housing that had all types of amenities. We have a dining room, we have a beauty salon, we have exercise rooms, we have a chapel. So, and then a few years later, we added 23 more units to the same campus of congregate housing. So we have this gorgeous development in Wilton. And so what happened? Right next door, a market rate developer built an apartment building right next door because we changed that street and we improved the street. And then we added a street light to the end of the street as well. So we transformed that street. So it wasn't thought of as land by the train tracks anymore. It's thought about as we have a whole bunch of nice apartments down here on this street. Some are market and some are affordable, and they're right next door to each other. And the market rate developer, he used the same color schemes that we did for our affordable. It looked very similar. They almost look like twins in a lot of ways. So we're really proud of that we build quality. And my mantra to my staff is affordable housing should be housing of choice. It's not housing of last resort. That they want to move into our development because it has what they need, has the aesthetics they need, and it has all the amenities that they need.
So I want to go back to the affordable housing plans that towns across the state are trying to put together to encourage affordable housing. And I'm trying to identify the carrots, the enticements. And we mentioned if water and sewer was already in place, that would be a plus, that would be helpful. If the town had some land that they wanted to dedicate in some sort of a lease, that would be helpful, but that doesn't apply in probably a lot of towns. So are there any other enticements that a town could dangle in front of a developer and say, look at me, look at my town? Anything like that come to mind?
Yes, I think one of the largest expenses of a property once it's built are property taxes. Just because it's affordable and we're a nonprofit does not mean we're exempt from paying property taxes, but we are taxed at the same level as a market rate developer because the property is being assessed at the current market value, even though we're not earning what the market rate developer is. So if the town could be flexible and working with an affordable housing developer to enter into a pilot program, or even if it's for the first 15 years during the tax credit period, to have the taxes be a little bit below market, it would really attract a lot of developers to invest. But only do that for nonprofit developers. Don't do it for the market rate guys.
Understood. Are there other towns that you're aware of that have offered favorable tax treatment to affordable housing projects?
Yes. A lot of the larger urban environments, Stanford, Norwalk, Bridgeport, they have definitely done that. We just purchased a building in Bridgeport that was affordable from a market rate developer who didn't want to deal with it anymore. So we took it over. And so we've inherited a pilot program that was already in place for that particular project. So it does happen. It takes a lot of negotiating on our part to make it happen and make the municipality understand that it's really important if they want to build affordable housing. But I also understand the other side of the municipality's position, because this is a density of housing that's coming in that may impact their road structure, may impact the school systems, and it may impact other things. But my argument is I'm bringing a resource to you that's going to make your local economy flourish, because all of these households are going to shop and participate in the local economy.
So a tax rebate would be what you'd be looking for. And did I hear 15 years?
I'm just putting it out there as an example.
Okay. And just to put it out there as an example, what might be a workable tax reduction, like 40% of the usual bill, 60% of the usual bill, a range? And I don't want you to negotiate here on the Citizen Mike Show, but what I really want you to do is start negotiating here in the Citizen Mike Show.
Okay.
So
okay.
get some idea, a ballpark as to what might be
Sure.
what might be workable.
I would say, let's go back to the town of Wilton. So right now I have 51 units of senior housing. My tax bill for those 51 units is $110,000 a year. I do not have a pilot for the independent senior side, but the congregate side of 23 units, I do have a pilot, and I'm paying $10,000 a year. So you can see there's a very big swing. Now, I don't expect to pay $10,000 a year, but I think if we could start at 50 to 60%. That would go a long way for the viability of the development. And keeping the development viable also means that you're keeping the property viable and you can attract the best kind of tenant.
And how would a developer such as yourself learn about towns that believe they have a better affordable housing plan? How does a town promote itself, I guess is what I'm saying. What space do they occupy in media or otherwise to say, here we are, look at our town for an affordable housing project? And I know full well, many people are not going to like what I'm saying, but I just want to know the tools that a town could use to get your attention.
Most of the time, they're putting out requests for proposals themselves. And so we keep a beat on that. We kind of monitor what's happening. You know, if they're interested in building affordable housing, we speak to different municipalities that we're interested in working in. You know, we'll meet with the group. We try to understand what it is that they're desiring. We have been monitoring some of the affordability plans that have been published, that we've been seeing, that have been out for public comment and that type of thing. So we're getting a sense of, you know, who's really serious and who isn't of, you know, building affordable housing. And you know, the state, I think, is really the entity that's going to put the pressure on the local municipalities.
You mentioned
they meet it.
you mentioned an RFP, but the town wouldn't be buying anything or selling anything. So I'm trying to get my arms around what what would that look like, if you could help us?
So it really depends on what the town is trying to do. So if they have land that they're interested in develop for affordable housing, they would put a request for proposal out there looking for a developer to partner with. That's one way. So that's where the municipality is looking and sourcing. The other way is us as a developer would come in and we would be looking at some of the land that may be for sale that we're buying from some private person that has land for sale. And so as we're looking at that land, we may then kind of swing through the planning and zoning to kind of get a sense of what their feelings are about that. If this is a good location, do they feel that, because as I said, we really try to partner, and they may, and in that conversation, we may find out, well, you know, we really wish you wouldn't put it there, but then we try to convince them, well, we really think it's a good idea to put it there. So, you know, we're really, you know, the big thing is, I think, is you're not going to see affordable housing smack dab in a cul-de-sac of a neighborhood, right? That's where homeowners don't want it. If it's on a main street, a main drag, we have a much higher success rate. Because a lot of times people who live in affordable housing need some amenities that private homeowners may not need, such as access to transportation, being able to get to the grocery store easily. So there's other things that they may need around the affordable housing.
So I'm going to rephrase what you said a little bit and see if this rings true with you. Wallingford, by the way, by way of context, doesn't allow multifamily in most of its areas. The multifamily zone is very limited, very restricted, actually. And if there is a piece of land that fits your criteria, sort of near amenities, near transportation, maybe near shopping, so on and so forth, you might need even though you don't need a zone change because you have 30G, I think you're saying you might ask for a zone change, or?
Yes, no? we would likely ask for a zone change. Yes.
Okay. And if that was denied, you would just drop the concept, I gather.
Right, because we don't want to spend our money in court.
Yeah.
And you know, there's lots of places that we could develop, but we really try to use it as an opportunity to educate the different municipalities. And I think this push for all the municipalities to put their affordability plans in play is really changing the conversation, because they know they have to do it. So they're saying to themselves, if we have to do it, if I have to reach 10% affordability, let's make sure we put in to our municipality that works for us. So it's really opened up the conversation and the dialogue between us as a developer and the municipalities.
And one last shot at this, and then we'll make that the final word. If a municipality was looking for a developer to partner with, they would put out an RFP, but the mailing list, is of some concern to me right now because I'm not familiar with how this all works. So where is the list of developers, investors, and so on that might be interested? How do we tell our purchasing department, go to this source and you'll find 20 names? Do they go to the state or region of governments, or how do you do that?
Right. So Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, I believe, has a list of developers throughout the state of Connecticut. And, and there's always Google, right? Google.
Right.
I'm hoping that, when you Google affordable housing developer, Connecticut Housing Partners name bubbles to the top. So, and we've had people reach out to us because that's how they found us. So they'll source a deal, they need a partnership, and they'll come to us and say, hey, I have this piece of land. What do you think? Is it something that we could work together on? And so, we do have those very serious conversations. And we're always looking to build our pipeline, and we're always looking for new opportunities. But if I could say this, I think the big takeaway that I want people to have from affordable housing and the importance of it is that it prevents homelessness, because without it, we would have a whole bunch of people who couldn't afford to rent an apartment. So right now, the average renter's wage in the state of Connecticut is about $17.50 an hour. To be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, you need about $25 an hour. So already there's a gap in regards to what people can afford. And when they put a tremendous amount of their resources into their rent, then that means other things suffer. Food resources suffer, medical resources suffer, educational resources suffer. So it's really important to have affordable housing to keep households stabilized.
Renee Dobos, let's make that the final word. And thanks for coming on the show. And I hope we can move the needle and multiply those affordable housing units in the near future. Thanks again for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So it's really quite simple. If you listen to Renee, one, tweak the zoning regulations to allow more multifamily housing in more areas in town. That's easy to do. Second is provide tax incentives for an affordable housing developer to come into town. We have an aggressive tax abatement plan attached to the incentive housing zone, which hasn't gotten any attention, but take that as the template, as a starting point, and preserve those tax abatements. And third, see how realistic your density limitations are. An affordable housing project in a congested area like the lower downtown of Wallingford it needs to have so many units per acre in order to make money, in order to be profitable and successful. You can't have unrealistic, density limits and still pretend that, that you're interested in an affordable housing plan. Thanks, Renee Dobos, for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. And thank you, listeners, for watching. See you next time. Good night, everybody.